And
I'm your host, Gia Scott, and today is March 16th, 2010, and this is episode 351. More about this program and the guests that have provided us with such fascinating conversations can be found on our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. The Dawn of Shades always tries to bring interesting people right to the audience to hear about both new and old ideas. We focus on the people, places, and ideas that don't always make the mainstream news, the sorts of things that are frequently labeled as alternative or paranormal. For the show tonight, if you would like to have a question asked, you can email me at giascott@gmail.com or cross your fingers that the virtual auditorium stays functional on Pal Talk, and you can send it to me there by text. I do monitor the email during the program, so if you're listening outside of the virtual auditorium and would like to have a question answered, please email it to me and I'll ask it for you. If you prefer, you can also send it through Facebook. I'm not quite as apart keeping up with things there, so you might have to give me a few minutes heads up. In the virtual auditorium, just go ahead and put it in text. I'll try and catch it as the screen scrolls. Don't say that 7 times fast or you really get your tongue in a knot. If I don't catch it the first time, please feel free to repeat it again. For those of you who are listening on a podcast, please go ahead and email me. I'll try to get your questions answered for you as well. And for everyone who likes to feel connected, I am on Facebook and Twitter. You can link to me there. Just Gia Scott. There's also a Dawn of Shades fan page on Facebook. You can look for that as well. If you like to read, I've got articles on a wide variety of topics available, and the links can be found on the website. Just click on my name, and if you're a foodie, you'll have to take a look at some of the food articles and find out what kinds of things I've been cooking up lately. At least the good stuff, anyhow. The failed things become Red Dog's dinner. Now, those you'd have to ask Red Dog about, but she doesn't write much, and she talks even less. But she does love failures. Tonight's guest is a man with a book, not something particularly unusual for our program, but the title sounds more like we intend on cooking up a brew for invisibility or to make ghosts visible. The title and cover photo intrigued me, and I had to start reading. The author is an interesting man in his own right, and I'm very pleased to welcome him to the program tonight. So, welcome to the program, Sean Belikarov.
Thank you very much, Gia. It's good to be on.
Well, there's always a first question that I ask every single guest, and it's probably the only thing that stays the same in every show. But would you be so kind as introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a little bit about yourself and about your website and where to get your book.
All right, you can do. I am S.M. Belikarov, Sean B. to most because the name is easily slaughtered. So I've been in the field of paranormal field investigations for about 17 years now. Done a lot of field work in the West Coast. We hunted down Bigfoots up in Washington State and checked down chupacabra sightings in Tijuana and some other fun spots and checked out every haunted place in between. I got back to Missouri and met my beautiful wife, who was originally from Korea, and she is the daughter of a what would be considered like a spiritual consultant over there, what we call kind of like as a psychic medium. She had consulted with various Buddhist monks and even the first female presidential candidate for Korea. So she kind of has an interesting background there. We got married, and before that we had formed Spooks, which is our group based out of the Ozarks, Springfield, Missouri specifically. And we've been investigating with Spooks this is our 6th year, going into the 6th year. During that time, I just started observing some synchronicities and had always had a kind of a book in my head, but had never got it down pen to paper, and just kind of the synchronistic events around my daughter Satori Lotus's birthday, her birth, just kind of put it into motion, and that's kind of what's got the whole ball rolling. The book's 2012, The Paranormal Cookbook. We're having a little problem on PayPal, but you can go check it out at spooksfield.com. We have links there, Barnes & Noble, Sporters.com, Amazon.com, and all that stuff, and they're carrying our book, so that would be the way to go for right now, because, like I said, the PayPal is a little janky right now. So, otherwise, that's pretty much the long and the short of it on my end.
Well, your book is very, very interesting, and as a reader with an interest in the field, I've read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of awful books.
You got to read those too, yeah. Just because you can never tell.
And I have to admit, everybody, when I got an email from Sean asking to come on the program, I was like, all right, show me the book.
So we the buddy.
Because I was afraid. I was very afraid. Because, like I said, you know, I get books sent to me all the time.
I can imagine.
And I have seen some that the best you could say about them was to not say anything at all. It reminded me of that old adage from childhood. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all.
Yep, which is an axiom for a reason. So
yeah. So that's not the case with the Paranormal Cookbook. The title was kind of misleading. I really didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those titles that we threw out there. It's a bit of a nod to the Anarchist Cookbook, and just kind of the idea that we took a bunch of the phenomena that it's kind of a bouquet of paranormal activity. We kind of examined the underlying psychological themes and what creates the manifestations. So it was kind of and we do talk about, you know, a recipe for creating a ghost, which is just kind of a joke title, and we put a couple other little things in there, but it's the title is a little misleading. I've heard that before, so.
Yeah. So, what are ghosts?
Ghosts. Well, the underlying theme of the cookbook is kind of that we have the ability to create our own realities. And when you look at a lot of the studies in quantum physics and some of this really highbrow science stuff, it's really getting to the degree where we're starting to understand a lot of this paranormal activity, how it manifests by just looking at a different model of reality, which is the quantum scale reality. We're kind of looking at it now as opposed to the Newtonian viewpoint. So ghosts, you can create a ghost out of nothing, and that's one of the interesting points in the book is that, you know, there's a case, it's called the Philip case, where I think it was 6 or 7 people got together, and this was done in Canada, and they sat down and they created a ghost, basically. They created a person that never existed, created a backstory for him, you know, that he committed suicide after his lover was found out by his wife, and she murdered her, I believe, and then he committed suicide, and this whole story was attached to it. But it was total fiction. It never happened. So, but over a period of you know, dozens of sittings, they could get the same type of seance activity with the wrappings, the table lifting, key bending, these type things. They could get it from just the same as you would get in any other seance or any other ghost type activity that would, you know, actually have some kind of physical phenomena that would be attached, like a poltergeist type thing. So it's interesting that you can take something that never existed and create it, and it can act almost independently of the group. And that's kind of another one of the things that we touch on, just the whole concept that when a group comes together and creates a thought form or creates a sustained thought, that it can start to kind of run amok and actually develops a will and a consciousness of its own.
Well, it's kind of interesting because there's a very famous haunted plantation house called the Myrtles, and it's about an hour and a half from New Orleans, where I live.
Right.
And
yeah, you guys got great spooky spots down there.
Yeah, well, it was about a year ago that we made a trip up there, and I knew before I went the ghost is supposed to be that of a particular slave girl. Often I can't remember her name.
Right.
And she supposedly poisoned 2 children, trying to make them sick and restore herself in good graces to the master of the house.
Right.
Now, in reality, Chloe was her name. Chloe. It never happened. Okay? She never killed those children. They died as adults in other locations.
Right.
The mother never died there.
Right.
She died someplace else as an old woman. And there was no slave named Chloe on that plantation owned by that when he owned it.
Right.
All right, this story didn't happen. People have seen her.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly
and so I go example. With really no anticipation.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
Of seeing a ghost.
Right.
So we go, and we paid for the spooky nighttime tour.
Right.
I thought, well, it'd be kind of fun, partly for the ambiance and partly because you were going to get the spook stories. Even though I knew
that's always a great story.
Yeah. So you go in, and you're not allowed to take photographs, and except of specific things, which was a mirror that's supposedly haunted.
Right.
And to me, it just looked like one more antique mirror. Okay.
Right.
Got it. But I have to admit, the house had a feeling like when you walk in a room and there's been a big argument, It's like it leaves some residue in the room. You know, you can cut the atmosphere with a knife.
That oppressive feeling, right, absolutely.
Yeah, the lower story of the house, that's what it felt like. I just didn't want to be in there.
Right.
The tour's not very long, maybe 30 minutes, okay? So we do the tour, and then I'm thinking, oh, this is kind of hokey, you know? And I'm outside, and, you know, I'm chit-chatting with some of the other people that are taking pictures, and again, we're taking pictures at night. And the one girl that we'd been walking around, kind of always in the same area, she had a brand new, fancy digital camera, and it was really messing up. It was doing all sorts of nonsense. Just would not behave. And, you know, we've been snapping pictures. She finally gets her camera working. And I was standing, at one point, I had one guy off to my left, sort of in front of me, and this girl was just slightly in front of me and off to my right. We're spread out maybe 30 feet. We're facing the same direction. We're all three taking pictures at the same time. I wish I could find these other two people, but I don't even know what their first name
was. Right.
And it was one of those in-passing conversation things, you know. And I snapped several series of pictures as I was moving towards what was my right, or the right in the photograph, towards the parking lot, because we were leaving. We had an hour and a half drive home, you know, it's like 9 o'clock at night. Anyhow, when I get, you know, when you're taking the pictures with a digital camera, you've got that little bitty screen. Okay, I'm at the stage of life where I need glasses to see
thank
things.
you.
And I can't really see much on that little screen. So until I get them home, I don't realize I've got anything unusual.
Right.
And I blew them up on the screen. I was like, Greg, do you remember a really small black person standing on the porch beside that chair?
Just chilling?
Because I knew there was nobody on that porch.
Right.
I thought, well, maybe I overlooked, because this person had to be short. Like
right.
4.5 feet tall. And he's like, no. And I said, well, do you remember a really fat woman or a really pregnant woman there either? And she's like, there. He's like, no. And I said, well, maybe you better take a look at these photos. In the one photo, there's the picture of the small, I thought a black person, but it could be wrong. As well as off on the right-hand side of the photo, there's what appears to be a pregnant woman moving along between the bushes and the porch. And the pregnant woman appears in two photographs. Okay, and I just kept thinking, oh, this isn't right. The figures are definitely there. But when I compared the photos, because I'd been there earlier in the day, in the daytime, and I'd taken photographs of the same patio area, same porch, there's no way you could walk between those bushes and that porch.
Yeah, that's...
No way. Where she was walking, there's no way.
Right.
Who was it? I don't know. Was it a ghost? Well, you know, it was something. I mean, the camera picked it up. I didn't, you know, Photoshop it in.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's what's interesting is you have so many of these elements that can appear in our own, what we laughingly refer to as objective reality, because the objective reality is just the consensus reality. It's just kind of what it's the sum total of expectations. And the step outside of that is where you get into these events that are labeled paranormal, just because they fall outside the normal spectrum of events. But it's amazing how much belief can. I mean, there's do you remember the Shadow program, the famous Only the Shadow Knows What Lurks in the Evil Hearts?
Oh yeah, the radio program.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
the guy that wrote that was named Walter Gibson, and he lived over in Greenwich Village at 12 Gay Street. And for 20-something years, he just cranked out lots and lots of shadow stories. It was his bread and butter. I mean, he turned out almost like one a month, full-length novel. So just over 20 years, you know, he just wrote tons of shadow stuff there. It would have been his all-consuming thoughts, basically. He eventually moved out of that place, and he eventually died. Later on, Hans Holzer, who's like one of the early ghost hunters, you know, one of the big OG ghost hunters, came in and was doing an investigation for a couple of guys that were living there through a newspaper lady that he had met, and he went and investigated it. And one of the entities that was seen in this house, you know, by all the people there at different times, was this entity that had a big, like, fedora hat on. It was totally entrenched in the shadows. It had its cape up, they had like a cape up, holding it up to where his nose and his eyes were, and they would have these sparkling eyes. And just this is almost exact the same look that was even on the Shadow movie poster whenever Alec Baldwin did the Shadow, however many years back. So I mean, it's just the idea of being, that maybe he created something that actually persisted beyond his death, that he created as a totally, a fictional thing in his mind, but just the effort to sustain that storyline, to sustain that character, could have brought him into this reality. Because up until then, and they didn't, nobody knew that was, it wasn't mentioned in the book that was, the residence of Gibson and these type things. So I mean, they had no idea about this history that the house had it too. So it's interesting. Then you get into Tibetan Tulpa stories, and there's a lot of Eastern thought about creating thought forms that can actually manifest and interact in our objective reality. So just cut me out because I get to rambling and ranting. So
no, you're doing just fine.
All right, good deal.
You're doing just fine. Now, many people, myself included, have seen what can only be called a ghost, because this entity seemed to lack real mass, couldn't have possibly appeared in that location, and you have no idea where the heck they came from.
Right.
Now, in my case, my first sighting of a very detailed ghost or entity or whatever was of a man and a black dog. Now, this occurred when I was like 14, 15 years old. Late at night, I was in the kitchen by myself, and I felt someone looking at me. I turned around. Across the room, I see a man and a big black dog, like a Labrador, sitting there beside him, looking at me. Well, they looked pretty solid. The guy wasn't dressed in clothing that caught your attention. It was probably, as I recall, it was like jeans and a flannel shirt, something that would be pretty timeless.
Right.
And I remember sidling along the kitchen, because the really funny thing, and it always caught me as funny, as I'm watching him, because I had to walk in front of the stove and the refrigerator and get closer to him before I got to the door that led to the rest of the house.
Of course.
And, I'm scared. I mean, the hair on the back of my neck is standing up, and I really want out of this kitchen. And I remember sidling along with my hands behind me, staring at them, and I kept my hands on the stuff behind me. I don't know what good that did, but it made me feel better.
It made you feel like it was grounded in reality, yeah.
I guess, when I got to the door, I ran like hell and went upstairs. Right? His eyes followed me, so this wasn't like, what people typically refer to as a shadow entity.
Right.
Right, so that he was somewhat interacting, even though he said nothing. The dog and him, they both looked at me as I
tracked your movement, yeah.
And I was scared to death. And to be honest, after that, I never wanted to be in that kitchen alone late at night.
I can understand that.
Yeah. And, lots of stuff happened in that house. And a lot of it was typical poltergeist activity. There's 3 kids going through puberty at the same time. If you want to use psychic energy as an excuse, it was there.
Right.
But we had things like pots of pans fly around the kitchen. One time the refrigerator burst into flames in the middle of the afternoon. There was, my sister had called my mother at work, hysterical. I wasn't home at the time. And, my mother rushes home thinking there's a fire. To get home, and there's no fire. There's soot on the wall, indicating that something had happened.
Right.
The refrigerator's working, and my mother replaced it because she just really wasn't too sure about this situation.
Right.
But, it was always something like that going on. And, there again, it was very typical poltergeist sort of stuff. You'd hear footsteps upstairs when you were downstairs and vice versa. We all had this aversion. There was these shimmery ball things that you'd see.
Oh, yeah?
And they'd be like 6 foot off the floor. And all of us hated to have to go up or down the stairs when it was one of those was going the opposite direction. Right. And it occasionally would happen, You'd start up the stairs and here it comes, and it was like, oh, yuck,
Did those,
it was like
I'm sorry.
cold slime, is the only way I can describe it.
Did those seem as interactive as the gentleman you seen with the Labrador there?
No, they seemed to be completely oblivious. They would just, they would typically, you'd see them near the ceiling downstairs. I don't know where they came from upstairs. But you normally, the first sign you would see of them would be, if you were going up or down, would be in the stairwell itself, you know. And, you know, growing up in a haunted house like that, you know, we would see things like, there was one particular bedroom, we had a little Chihuahua mixed dog, and she had epilepsy. And you would hear her yelping, you would go hunting for her because it usually would indicate she was having a seizure.
Right, right.
And I don't know how many, she usually would not go in what we call the yellow bedroom, which happens to be my brother's bedroom. She wouldn't go in there. She would have nothing to do with the yellow room. And she would be in that room, and when you'd see her, it would look like someone had their hands around her in the middle, you know, around her body, and was holding on to her. She'd be turning around as though she was biting at somebody. You couldn't see anything.
Right.
And when you would walk in the room, it was like they turned her loose, and she would run out of that room, and she would go in underneath my mom's bed, and she wasn't coming out for nothing.
Yeah, she sensed something in there, huh?
You know, it seemed to pick on the dog.
Poor thing.
You know, and I don't know how she got caught in there, because like I said, normally you could not get her in there. Not even a piece of hot dog could you bribe her through that door.
Couldn't even get her
nothing.
On the bribe. Wow.
No, nothing. She did not want to go in there. If we, for some reason, wanted her in there, you had to pick her up and carry her.
Physically move her into that location.
Oh, she was not going to walk.
Yeah, animals pick up on a lot of that stuff. I mean, that's one of the best, actually, biosensors you can have out in the field is have a good dog that, you know, actually, can pick up on these things, because they pick up on things a lot that a lot of us, you know, miss because our frequencies are a little different in both our sight and the hearing spectrum, so. And of course,
now, in all these ghosts that you've gone in pursuit of, whether they were cooked up from someone's imagination or whatever,
right?
Have they ever been able to do anything physically to the people?
Yeah, there is on occasion physical interaction. Usually, you'll see, you know, scratches or a rash or something of this nature. Every once in a while, a handprint that's left, you know, with a red impression. Not usually a whole handprint, but it'll be like 2 or 3 fingers. And usually it's the people that are kind of already susceptible to having the idea that this thing can attack them or whatever, because, again, you know that we influence our realities to such a degree. I think maybe because I chase them down, they don't really mess with me too much. I'm no fun, I guess, maybe. If they get off on scaring, then I'm not the best one to try that with. But yeah, the physical interaction is usually very minimal as far as it happens very rarely, but it does on very rare occasions occur, and that's why we're careful about who we take to what locations, because some places just have more reputation and therefore are more likely to, you know, conducive to creating a physical altercation type, you know, situation. So we try to keep, you know, we don't take the newbies and try to break them in on Zombie Road or anything. That's what I'm saying. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I know that my mother had always told us a ghost can't do anything to hurt you unless you let them.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and that little bit of folk wisdom is basically, you know, as true today as when she found that, you know, was told that, because a lot of things, you know, in our like I said, the objective reality can't harm us unless we really allow them to, and the more we're getting into how the world is very much it's an interactive universe where, you know, our expectations actually create the reality. As we're getting to understand that more and more, we're understanding that we have control over these things that are set within our own belief systems. And that's why whenever we go out to do, say, a cleansing or anything, we always use the religious practices of whoever the clients or whatever you want to call them, the participants there are, because it's important, because that's their belief structure. And they, you know, in their belief structure, whatever this is, this spirit, demon, entity, whatever, is still governed by their God's rules, because that's their belief system. So that's why it's important to make sure you take, you know, everybody's beliefs into account, because it can be very problematic if you do a cleansing and say the people, the participants there are Wiccan, you know, and they really don't adhere to a Christian God or an Islamic God or a Hindu God or whatever. It's not going to resonate as much, so it's not as effective. So.
Now, we do have a question from the virtual auditorium. They would like to know, do houses with a murder have more ghosts?
They definitely have more proclivity to having activity because they have that perceived, already haunted type thing. But I would say that almost across the board, almost as much you can have hauntings that are just in dilapidated buildings that don't have any murders or any young deaths attached to them or anything like that. So a lot of it is ruled by perception, because the murder houses are well known in our paranormal community and are expected to have that manifest. A lot of times you will see some good results from those type places, but I don't think that they specifically have more entities than anything else. I think it's just dependent on who's there at the time for them to put a show on for. So.
Well, that's interesting. And the idea that people's preconceptions affect the ghost's ability to haunt.
Right.
I think back, my mom surprised me one time. We were going to have dinner and take a tour at a haunted hotel. And it supposedly was, highly haunted. And, in the process of talking to, because there was a group of people going, she's talking about it, and she's like, that I was always a magnet for ghosts from the time I was born. I was like, well, I don't remember her ever saying that before. So everybody has this high expectation, because she told everybody, if there's a ghost there, it's going to show up with her there.
Right.
I'm like, I haven't seen a ghost in a long time. But okay.
Right.
So we took the tour. Everybody has high expectations, and not a thing happened. There wasn't so much as a cold spot in the room.
Yeah, and that's it all. There's so many dynamics that are entered into the whole manifestation process, and that's even at times when the expectations are just right, something can trigger certain mindsets to lapse. So it is really fascinating, and
yeah, because I was really curious about this hotel because I've been told, they've got this demonic pattern in the ballroom floor, and they've got this element that's sure indication of demonic connections. And,
right.
In terms of architecture, this was a relatively important building. It was built by a woman. It was actually the last Harvey House building. It was built in Louisville, Arizona.
Right.
And it was built by Mary Coulter something or another. Anyhow, it's a fascinating building. It had been restored, and it was open again as a hotel. And they had a restaurant in it. And so, because it still had a lot of the artwork that had been put in it when it was originally built, which I thought was really, really weird. And anybody who thinks that drugs are the latest thing...
Yes, the latest, greatest thing. I'm sure that the Chinese didn't have opium until 1999. Check my source.
Whatever the artist was using was incredibly powerful because there was some weird artwork. That was the only weird thing I saw in the building, and it's the artwork bothered me. I didn't like it. I wouldn't want it in my own house. I didn't want a copy of it. I didn't want a book of it. The artwork bothered me, but the rooms didn't. I didn't see anything particularly satanic in the building. And like I said, I'd heard lots of stories over the years.
Yeah.
And so we get there, and it was like, this is disappointing.
Big build up. Yeah, I hate the anticlimactic ones. And there is. I've been to some places like at Myrtle's. I really didn't have much anything really, and it's it has such that it does have that southern oppressive almost because it's back in the backwoods, and it's it's got its own beauty, but it's kind of
as far as wanting to stay there, I didn't even like the building because I think it was haunted. No, it's just one of those places that I think has got a lot of.
It's close enough. You should definitely make the trip. But
now I don't know how much touring you did in the St. Francisville area, but Rosedown and Oakley, which are both owned by the state of Louisiana, those are buildings that just have a really good feel to them.
Yeah.
I mean, when you walk on those grounds and you're walking through the building and everything, this was a place where people were usually happy.
Right.
You can just feel it.
Yeah.
And I like to go and tour those places.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
That's just, and I think about some of the strange things that I've seen. One time I had my kids and my grandmother and my mother with me, and we were going to an old mission in New Mexico. And my grandmother had been there a number of times. It was pretty much, we wouldn't say it was restored at all. It was fallen down. The roof was gone off of the church. There were no doors, no windows, no nothing left there. I mean, it was pretty much, the whole thing was kind of in that state of repair. Anyhow, we're walking around the grounds, and my grandmother and mother had stopped and were sitting on a bench. And I'd walked ahead, and I walked into the church through where, once upon a time, the original front doors were. And when you walked in, it was like, whoa. People weren't very happy when they were coming through those doors. And I kind of looked around and was like, okay, I'm just leaving. And the way I would describe it, it was like an aroma or scent that was left behind by negative feelings. It was like a stain. And, my son was 4 at the time, and so my daughter would have been about 12. And, I went outside and was kind of wandering around, but I was where I could watch him, because I haven't said anything to him. It tells you there's not many people around. I'm letting the 4-year-old wander with elbows on his hands, And he's wandering around and snooping at things in his 4-year-old way.
Right.
And he gets to the church building first, and he walks through where the front doors have been. And he stops kind of real quick, like he made 2 steps in, and he literally backed out. And then he just found something else to do. You keep in mind, I hadn't said anything to either one of them. I was just curious to see what they did.
Right.
And then by and by, here comes my daughter, and she walks in. She walked in further than he had. She kind of looks around like something smelled bad in there.
Right.
And she left, and they went off to explore other areas because they really didn't like that particular building. And, it was interesting to watch, because, kids are like brand new blackboards, nothing much is written on.
Yeah, well, they haven't been programmed to the degree we have, so they pick up on a lot of things that we see as impossible, but, so definitely.
Yeah, I found it interesting to watch. Apparently, my grandmother knew what it was going to be like. She had no interest in going in there.
Yeah.
And like I said, she'd been there many times before, and I just never had gone. And it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it always is this, because every place has its own feel to it, and I'm unfortunately I'm feeling dead to all that stuff. Apparently, my wife can pick up on it real well. We got a couple other people that are more sensitive than I am, so I'm kind of just the point man, because I enjoy the stuff and I pursue it, but it really doesn't spook me real easy. So that way, they can kind of clue me in on, this place has got this kind of energy, and it's interesting because some of the times it does match up with the history. A lot of times I won't know the history of a location, but a lot of times it doesn't either. So it's kind of hit and miss as far as that goes. But it's interesting, the dynamics that go in, because whenever I got my wife out in the field, and I call her my spirit photographer, but really she's a paranormal phenomena facilitator. But that's kind of hard to get on a business card there. But she basically creates the atmosphere, and it's part of it's because of her mom. She has these spirits that are drawn to her naturally, anyways. But we run at over a 30% rate of anomalies on film whenever we have her out in the field, as opposed to when I'm by myself or with certain other people. Whatever, we run about 2 to 3% from my just by myself, and 3 to 5% on with another person. So it's just an amazing, almost 10 times over the amount of hits we get on just things that we catch on film that are interesting because she's there. Because and again, I don't know if it's because she's there that actually it manifests, or because I believe that she's there that it manifests. But regardless, we get some interesting pictures. So
yeah. And when you were first introducing yourself, you mentioned also the chupacabra.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chupacabra is a fascinating creature, and since I spent so many years living in the Southwest, I heard the chupacabra.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
Heard stories of it many, many times, as well as other spooky, creepy things.
Right.
And a lot of people, I guess they don't realize chupacabra just means goat sucker.
Yeah, that's literally what the name means.
Yep, there's actually a sucker called Chupa Chupa.
Yep. So.
And so, have you seen a chupacabra?
No, I haven't had the pleasure. I guess we went down south of Tijuana a little ways and tried to go to some land out there that supposedly had some nests, and we found some some chickens and a couple other things that have been exsanguinated, but we never actually found any definitive evidence that was caused from chupa as opposed to a just regular stray mongrel that they tend to run in packs down in Mexico, strength in numbers and all that. But the chupa's fascinating because you have like two sets of chupas. You got the chupas that are very canid, they're very dog-like, the ones that are more popular nowadays. But when it originally started, it looked much more like a gargoyle or a gray alien because it was this thing that was said to walk on two legs, have short little kind of like kangaroo arms, had in some encounters had wings that were folded back, and other encounters it looked like spikes, but it was posed that it might have been the wings that they had seen at a certain angle. And just the evolution of the story and the sightings is really interesting because if it is flesh and blood canids that we just kind of like a cross mutated type dog or whatever, the pattern is consistent as far as with them moving up further and further north. But the other sightings is more sporadic, and it tends to kind of zigzag more, and that's the ones that are a little bit more interesting because you get into the field and you start seeing these things that appear in connection with places that are high volumes of UFOs or that have high hauntings, and they kind of they overlap each other, or lots of Bigfoot sightings, these type of things. So it's interesting how these phenomena will overlap in any certain given area. In the desert out there, you guys have a lot of interesting stuff going on. You had the Dulce out there and Las Vegas, or out in Nevada, and a lot of fun stuff out there in New Mexico. But a lot of fun stuff out there.
Well, I've seen some strange things. I've seen some things that I can't explain. I tend to be, you might say I'm sensitive to things, but at the same time, when you've seen a certain number of scary things, the scare factor begins to decrease.
Right.
There's the alarm or the this is a strange phenomena, and we have this natural fear of the unknown.
Right.
But as far as actually getting the major heebie-jeebies, that really doesn't something that occurs to me anymore.
Yeah, well, you get to a point where the scare factor isn't nearly as big as the curiosity factor for me. So,
well, not to say that it's completely gone, because I do.
I think anybody that doesn't have any fear of any of that, the unknown, there's probably something wrong with them.
Seriously wrong with them? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just not a natural way to be. Fear is something that's been around with us since
it's a protective mechanism.
Exactly.
There's a reason.
Exactly. So.
But I have seen some things that I cannot find any explanation for, no matter how hard I try. I have the file. I'm going to G-rate it, but it's the weird stuff file.
Right.
And
deleted.
Yeah. It's the weird stuff file, and into that file goes the things that I've seen that I could not explain, that I could not figure out a logical, reasonable solution for.
Right.
And some of it was really, really weird. Some of it's only mildly weird. But a few things really, really stand out in my mind, and I'm sure that it's pretty much the same with you.
Yeah, and well, the thing is also, once you kind of have experienced something that's out of the ordinary, it really expands your view, and that's another one of the major points of the book is just that experience. What we experience is much more real than what we learn, because what we learn is just a story. We may believe it or not, but once we experience something, it's totally incorporated into our belief system and our worldview. So it's it stays with you. So it's actually a more concrete reality from a psychological point of view than whatever you read in a book that's so-called objective reality.
Yeah, but it's no longer what you would call theory. Okay, it's
right.
one thing for somebody to tell me about seeing a black, shadowy, hominid sort of entity that chased him.
Right.
Okay, it's another when I say, that happened to me one night.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I have to admit, for over a year after I had my odd encounter, I was embarrassed, I was ashamed because of my fear response.
Right.
And at the time even I thought, this is so not like me. Because it was what I would call a primal fear. This was an unreasonable, out of the ordinary fear response, as though this fear was being somehow delivered from the outside into me.
Right.
Total blind panic, I gotta run, it's gonna get me. And the thought...
That ain't nothing else, yeah.
Yeah. The thought in my mind that kept going over and over and over again was, if it catches me, it's a fate worse than death.
Right.
Now, in my personal belief system, that in itself makes no sense.
Right.
Okay, it doesn't fit anything about me.
Yeah.
Why was I thinking that thought over? That was the only thought I could fix on.
Right.
And that makes no sense. So afterwards, about a year later, someone else starts telling me a story about their encounter with what we now call the black thing.
Right.
And it was identical to mine.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? That happened to me. Because at the time I thought, I was married to my first husband at the time, and I thought, this had to be caused by suggestion.
Right.
We were both together during the incident. It had to be he was trying to scare me or something.
Right.
And I was kind of embarrassed because I had been that suggestible.
Right.
And so forth and so on. Because this would chase us several miles down a road I used regularly. And I have to admit, it was a month or two that I wasn't too sure about driving down that road alone at night.
I can imagine.
And, it really did kind of throw me for a loop. And so I hear the other story. So then I started asking other people. And so far, now, collecting stories is what I call it. This isn't a scientific survey method or anything.
Right.
But I've discovered that, it's happened all over the world. I've collected it in, I've heard stories everywhere except Asia. I haven't heard any stories like that from Asia.
Oh, there's some there. I can tell you that.
And no matter what method of transportation, because I've gotten stories from people on foot, on bicycle, on horseback, and in motor vehicles, it always just almost catches them.
Yep.
And the panic, fear level is identical.
Yep.
The unreasonable fear. And they're never alone when it occurs.
Yep.
It's always two or more people.
Yeah.
Usually two, but occasionally it's been 3 or 4. So this is a pretty uniform worldwide phenomenon. Oh, the other odd thing was it always occurs in UFO hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes you think, well, maybe it's associated with those.
All right.
What is it? I don't know. Do I want to do it again? Oh, no.
And that's the interesting thing is how often these places overlay, like you're talking about, because down here where we've had the Hellhound, whatever case, our pursuit of them for 4 months, it's along 65 and 13, which are both UFO hotspots as defined by Hynek, the big scientist back in the 60s or whatever that did the Blue Book project and all. So it's interesting how often you see these things overlap. And as far as with the primal fear, that's that that nighttime. It's always.
Oh, I've also collected sightings in daytime.
No, I'm just saying that the mentality it's always interesting because in the daytime you can kind of rationalize away things. A lot of times things will happen at night and they'll absolutely terrify you. But in the daytime you try to rationalize it away. But at that moment, that fear, that night, that event is totally worth. It's valid to be fearful of that because that's the mentality we have at that point because of what we're in.
What I find interesting is in the sightings there usually comes a point where to continue this blind flight would result in a probable accident, injury, and or death.
Right.
This entity, whatever the heck it is, seems to stop the pursuit just before that
just
point.
Just short of that, yeah. And that's also common with hellhound sightings, with Mothman sightings. These entities will chase people and have them driving in excess of 100 miles an hour, and then they just back off for the last minute, like you're talking about. So, yeah, you definitely see that with a lot of encounters with things, the weird stuff of outside. That kind of haunts the byways and trails and stuff. So it's always.
And I've seen other things that were explained as Tianakloshi, which is a Navajo word. It's pronounced slightly different, but I can't make the clicking noises and whatnot. And we recently had, or a couple months ago, we had a guest on from the Navajo Reservation and his partner, and they have Four Corners Crypto.
Yeah.
And they talked about the Chupacabra and the Bigfoot and the other things that they chase up there. And their stance is that Chupacabra and the what we typically call the humpback flute, the Kokopelli, are the same, and they're both representations of the pets of the Anasazi.
Right.
Which I found was interesting. I had never heard that story before, and I had lived in that area quite a long time.
Right.
And I had never heard that all associated together. Kokopelli always represented fertility and whatnot,
Right.
So this was a new association for me.
Yeah, that's
and, the idea that Chupacabra could be the remnants of a pet of an ancient civilization, that's very plausible. I mean,
I never heard that before either. That is interesting, though.
Mm-hmm. Because I had talked about, because I've seen some weird things on the desert.
Mm-hmm.
When you're on the desert, as the sun's setting, there's a moment when, and it just lasts about a minute, when the sun's at a certain point, the light is refracted just right, and everything goes gold. And I mean, it looks like it's covered in gold.
Castaneda talks about it pretty extensively.
Yeah, and it happens every night. Every night I've seen it a lot. Yeah, it is. It's totally magical. Well, one night during that magical moment, I'm driving down the same road that black thing chased me on, and this thing crosses the road in front of me, an animal. Now, I don't know what kind of, I know all the animals in the area. I've lived there a long time. I spent a lot of time outdoors.
Right.
I know all the animals. I don't know what the heck this was. It was somewhat like an armadillo, because it was armored like that. It was much, much larger because this was knee-high. An armadillo never gets that big.
That's a big armadillo.
Yeah. It was about knee-high. It was probably from the tip of its tail to the tip of its nose, 5 or 6 feet long. And it was gold. And I mean, it looked like it was made out of gold straight from a Mayan temple.
Really?
And it crossed the road in front of me and disappeared into the brush. Do you think I could find it? Oh, no.
Of course not. Yeah, you never can.
Yeah.
That's the thing about hunting them down. It's always...
I'm not what I would call an expert tracker. I'm probably better than the average Joe.
Right.
But you can't get tracks off of rock
hard pans hard.
And, lots of places don't have that. I mean, there's
right.
If I had any idea where it come from, where it was going, I may have possibly been able to pick up a trail. But, there again, there was that golden moment.
Right.
As the sun's setting, I don't have much time.
Yeah.
And, whatnot. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, so, that ties in with the Toltecs and how they kind of perceive time as being, at certain points in the day that, certain points were magical, kind of, and that was one of the sacred points was, that dusk time where reality is almost at a thinness where things, the magic is, there's a magical possibility, there, and that's
I can't dispute that because, that was a moment that I loved being able to just stand and be in.
Yeah. Right.
Because it was that special.
Yeah,
I mean, the whole world just went gold, and it was literally
and it's
just
not
like
anything you're
covered
forget.
in gold dust. And, there again, it was a daily thing. So
Right.
I guess in a way it's not surprising. Most people take it for granted and don't notice it, really.
Right.
But for me, it was like a really special time of day,
That's cool. Yeah, it's good that you could appreciate the nicety of the moment, because we get lost a lot of time, and especially with our technologically advanced society and all these whatever we got going on, we kind of get lost to the beauty of nature and just the grandeur, that's out there.
Yeah, I have to admit, I probably had a unique upbringing because I come from a cowboy family, and I grew up with people that had been born in the 1800s as an important part of my daily life.
Right.
I was expected to notice things, and, heaven help me if I arrived to visit my grandparents, and I could not give my granddad a report about how much water there was in various locations, how recently it rained, whether or not there was any forage, what kind of forage was available, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to get that at 65 miles an hour.
That's good, though. That's good. That's that'll serve you well, and it's a good little piece of observational skills to have.
Yeah, and it was from him, that you were expected to at least notice basic things about tracking, which I've discovered. Right. I didn't realize that not everybody had to know these things.
Right. It was just part of your normal everyday upbringing. So
yeah,
it's
normal.
And
it was normal. I had to know whether or not anybody had driven through this gate since I went through this gate last,
Right.
Did anybody else walk down this path since I was here last? These were normal things. How many cows were here,
That's funny.
Yeah. Oh, was the horse wearing shoes or was the horse barefoot? Most people don't realize they leave very different tracks.
Yeah. I can imagine. So, man, that's
cool,
though.
This was normal stuff for me.
Yeah, that's a nice little skill set to have, though. That's nice. Because I have a guy that I have to use to kind of help me along with that. I'm learning as I go, but I'm still a novice. So
it's mostly a case of learning to pay attention.
Yeah, that's what I'm learning more and more, is that it just is actually taking the time to know the details.
It's the same observation skills. I laugh because even like when I go to the grocery store, I will notice all sorts of things. And, like I might turn to Greg and say, "Did you see so-and-so?" He's like, "No." Well, I have a background of working in law enforcement and doing these other things, and it's like observation was always an important
key.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you're paying attention, and therefore you pick up on things. You notice that so-and-so was getting in their car when you pulled in the parking lot.
Right.
Is it important? No, you just notice it. It's just because that's the way you're supposed to be.
That's it. That's how you were raised. That was normal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So and that sort of stuff I find probably helps me when I go off on my own pursuits.
Yeah, I imagine.
The strange and unusual.
Yeah, I think the detail is definitely key because so many times you'll pick up something later on, and something that you observed earlier will actually make sense, given the whole picture, but if you didn't have paid attention to get that first little puzzle piece, then you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Right.
Well, it also makes you more likely to notice if someone's trying to jerk your chain.
Yeah, and you will get those, on occasion.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of sad because, I don't know if you've encountered cases that the case probably had legitimacy, but because of somebody's anxiety to make it bigger than it really is, they hoaxed part of it, and therefore none of it has any relevance.
Yeah, exactly. And you do have to take that into account because there's so much of that that is rampant, and with the interest, peaking in the paranormal right now, you've seen more and more of that. So there's more legitimate reporting of legitimate, cases, but there's also a bump in the hoaxes. So like the Bigfoot case that we got blamed for, even though that was done by people that were Bigfoot debunkers, because they found the Bigfoot carcass and all, we got blamed for that. So it's just kind of that double-edged sword.
Yeah. Well, hang on to those thoughts with that double-edged sword. Watch out for the sharp edge. And it's time for us to take a break. So, folks, do stay tuned to the Dawn of Shades, and we'll return with Sean Delacroix in just a moment. In the meantime, check out our website, www.exogenynetwork.com.
I don't believe it. Don't touch me. Hey, Ray. Hey, Sugar. Tell him
Welcome back to the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and once again, I would like to remind everyone to visit the website, www.exogenynetwork.com. You can sign up for the newsletter, walk around, check it out. Let me know what you think of it. There are links there to take you to blogs, Twitter, and even Facebook. If you have a question that you wish to have asked, you can email it to me at giascott@gmail.com. I am monitoring the email during the program with Sean Belcurov tonight, and I'll try real hard not to miss a thing. Sean, before we get started at chatting again, would you please tell everyone where your website is and what they might find available there?
It's we're at spooksfield.com, and we got the 22 Paranormal Cookbook over there. It's $7.99. I think it's $4 for the shipping. We're having a little problems with PayPal, so you can go onto the Borders, Barnes & Nobles, or Amazon links there, and it'll take you to where the book's at.
Very, very good. Very good. And let's see, we were talking about hoaxes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Have you had a little personal experience with some hoaxes, perhaps?
Yeah, you see quite a few, especially with residential hauntings. A lot of times, college-age folks love to try to yank you around a little bit. More than that, even we just get prank phone calls that end with numbers and names of people that don't exist. So it's kind of reflective of our age because we live in this very quick-paced society. So a lot of times we'll get a message on the board or something, and it'll either be posted by anonymous, and there's no follow-up email, so it makes it a little tough sometimes. But we try to figure it out from there, and a lot of times just investigative techniques, simple stuff like seeing if you lead the witness, if they're going to shake off their story, or seeing if the details are tripping them up, or if they're elaborating, without you giving them a cue. These type things are pretty good indicators of whether or not people are telling the truth. So you get into a little bit of the psychology of it, and I'm sure you've had some fun with that.
Well, basic, investigative techniques are pretty much universal, I'd say.
Right.
Yeah. My personal experience with hoaxes has been that they're an aggravating waste of time and energy and attention.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is, it takes away time that you could be spending, actually looking into something that has merit, and it just comes with the territory, but it is frustrating sometimes. So, and like I said, with the recent spike in interest in paranormal, there's also a spike in hoaxes. So we'll keep on trying to figure out what's real and what's just a urban legend gone awry.
Yeah. That is rather unfortunate that people do waste people's time and attention, and not only with the ghost hunting sort of thing, but UFO investigators deal with it.
All across the board. I think everybody in the field that we're doing, cryptozoology study, ghost hunting, UFOs, whatever you're doing, there's going to be a certain element of the population that's going to kind of get a kick out of messing with you. So it's no big deal. You take it in stride. Like I said, it comes with the turf. So.
Yeah. Well, what's been your most exciting, frightening, thrilling case you've ever investigated?
Probably the most interesting was what we call Mystery Farm X. It's a little spread out in the middle of Missouri, over 100 acres. It became basically just a ranch for a family that was from out west originally, and they had all kinds of activity going on there. It was similar to like the Skinwalker Ranch or the Contact Ranch activity. They had poltergeist activities such as orange juice bottles, juice drink bottles for the kids being emptied without ever being punctured or not even being broken from the vacuum seal. Clothes turning up either on top of or inside a locker, a meat locker that was on the back porch, so it was always locked. The thing that kind of got our attention, they finally contacted us when they had a Bigfoot sighting that was out there kind of watching the fireworks on the 4th of July for them. And after that, we came out and kind of investigated. And probably the spookiest thing that I had seen and the weirdest thing, just because it was so discongruent, was this thing that we seen that was probably about 15 feet away from us. I was smoking a cigarette. It was me, the mother, the older daughter, and the son that were there. And this thing had a humanoid body, but it had a camel's head that was like 2 times the size of what his body would dictate. And it kind of moved in a jerky fashion. It crossed and kind of disappeared. It was kind of like if you turn off older television, how it reduces to a point of singularity. It was almost like that. That was pretty interesting. And we went and looked, and there was hoof prints there, looked similar to goat prints, but a little bit longer. And the depression was about 6 inches in semi-hard mud. So it had a little bit of weight on it, but something had moved through that just left the tracks for about 10 feet. And there was a start point and an end point, but there was nothing, and it wasn't like it went into underbrush where you couldn't track it. It just stopped. So there were some other interesting things that happened on the farm. So one night I figured how big a swatch of fence it was, but a big part of the fence, and including the posts, just disappeared sometime between 2 and 5 a.m. Cows got loose. We had to chase them down. It was the only time I ever got to actually do a doggy roundup. So, but it was an interesting place. It was frustrating at the same time though, because it's hard to pin down what's causing all this stuff, and it's really upsetting for the people that are going through it, because they really they're losing money from crop circles. They're losing money from mutilations, these type things, which we didn't have any muties in our case, but Skinwalker Ranch, these places. The eldest daughter was diagnosed by her school counselor as having a mild schizophrenia, because she said she was hearing voices. But we were all hearing voices. I mean, anybody that went on the land was on there more than a couple times would hear, this disembodied metallic sounding voice that seemed to emanate from nowhere. So, it's just that stigma that's attached to these events that make it so hard for people to report them, because by the time they get to us, it's almost they almost have a tone of desperation to them. That they're just they can't figure out what's going on. They're either have talked to the law and they're no help, or they haven't talked to the law because they're scared of being singled out as kind of quacks and stuff. But a lot of times their neighbors will be experiencing similar things. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that such a creature would be sighted. I mean, I've never seen anything like that, I have to admit.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff out there, and like I said, I think we all kind of contribute to it. But like Mothman, that's another one of those weirdos. And there's been some really interesting things like botanical vampires and bushes with eyes, and a lot of stuff in the UFO state. The UFO stuff that has been kind of interesting. So there's some really bizarre cases out there. Here we've got one of the locals up in Joplin is that we have a Goat Man grave, which there's several Goat Man locations throughout the U.S., but that's one of the more interesting we've got around here. We also have been having a lot of werewolf reports coming out of the Benton, Berryville area, down south of Missouri, just a little bit in Arkansas. So that's kind of what we've been looking into recently.
So okay, I've seen the werewolf movies. That's about the extent of my knowledge of werewolves. How would you describe a werewolf?
Well, the Hollywood version isn't that far off. One of the main differences of what's reported, and we kind of point this out in the book, is that a lot of times their face will seem disfigured or burned. It'll look like kind of like the skin's tore and kind of been piecemealed back together. But the general Hollywood version of werewolves is pretty consistent with a lot of what we get with the reportings. They're usually between 6 and 8 foot tall, usually on the smaller side, usually about 6 feet. Hairy, hair covered. Usually their face will be free of hair, or it'll have hair around the edges. Like I said, a disfigured face is really one of the more common things that's been left out. They don't have as protruding a nose, a snout, as what is usually reported. But it's interesting because you have these creatures that are still sighted, they've been around since cave art, because there's a Chippendale was his name, is a professor that works on cave drawings and verifying the age and what have you, authenticating the age, and he stated that that vampires and werewolves and animal hybrids have been around with us since the cavemen have been painting things on the wall, from the earliest stuff in France and Australia and a couple of these other places that are tied into the beginning of civilization. They're finding pictures of werewolves and vampires there right alongside the woolly mammoths and other stuff. So,
yeah, that's it's something that modern science has tended to encourage us all to just poo-poo and ignore.
And that's the same position that like the church took back in the day. A lot of the reports say, it was so prevalent in the Middle Ages, werewolf attacks and things, that they couldn't go about and say, that, these things don't exist. So basically the idea was they say, okay, well, it does exist, but it's not really there. What it is Satan deceives a person into believing they're a wolf, then he creates an astral double of them that attacks people, and, that explains the werewolf phenomenon. So, it was so prevalent that they couldn't dismiss it. But, modern science likes to, think it's the end-all of everything. But every generation we find out new things that we didn't know. The world was flat before it was round. So I think it's a matter of perspective.
So these werewolves, they're normal people until the full moon?
I'm more inclined to believe that werewolves probably represent kind of an environmental archetype, that they kind of manifest when certain environmental and psychological factors are prevalent. I think they're probably astral beings, basically, or if you want to think of them as like interdimensional beings, something along those lines.
As I recall, the stories of them, they tend to appear more frequently during times of famine and
absolutely.
strife.
Yeah, they show up a lot of times when you have adverse conditions like that. The werewolf reports have spiked whenever World War II was breaking out, around the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that would kind of go in with the theory that maybe we have a planetary poltergeist, that that at certain points when consciousness is at a certain level, these entities are more likely to manifest because it's the planet or the consciousness of the planet acting out. And another interesting thing is these creatures a lot of times are sighted along ley lines and also geographic fault lines. So that's kind of interesting to take into account. And
I really should do some more research about the ley lines, because I often get to wondering. I think about all the creatures that are sighted in the vicinity of these UFO sightings, which include Bigfoot, the Black Thing, and numerous other things. Are they all along ley lines?
Yeah, and see, that's kind of the idea is, I'm more and more that I look into it, the more it seems like there's certain places or certain geographic places that are just kind of a soap opera of paranormal activity, just different stuff happening a lot, but a lot of different anomalous activity. And that would include the Skinwalker Ranch, West Virginia with the Mothman Flap, and these type of things. So it's always interesting to see how that there seems to be one driving paranormal intelligence or whatever intelligence behind all this stuff, that it just kind of manifests itself in different ways at times.
Now, most of these creatures, besides the ghosts don't seem to prey upon anything.
Right.
But most of these other creatures tend to prey upon man, either directly or the animals that support man.
Right.
Which leaves evidence. In the recent werewolf reports, have there been attacks on people or their animals?
Again, it's usually a lot of times. There has been a couple. There was a couple of chickens and goats that were slaughtered in one of the cases that we looked into, and it had terror. It was consistent with some kind of large predator that would have been slashing it. Beyond that, we couldn't say, because there's lots of bears down in the Ozarks where it occurred. More often than not, though, what you generally get is kind of like you said, they'll chase you up to the point where, for whatever reason, just all of a sudden they disappear. And that's a consistent theme with werewolves, is they have that ability, like vampires, like Men in Black, like Black-Eyed Kids, and all these other entities, to just kind of disappear all of a sudden. So it's kind of, it suggests that something else is going on, something that's beyond flesh and blood. And that's kind of where I've gotten to think about the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, too, because Bigfoot's been, shot on several occasions and sometimes left a, substantial blood trail, and then just all of a sudden it will disappear, which is not so strange because, your animals do like to burrow and hide whenever they, hunker down whenever they are injured or hurt. But you couple this with the tracks that'll just stop in the middle of nowhere, Bigfoot disappearing in front of the eyes of some witnesses, things like this, even Bigfoot wearing flannel shirts, So, I mean, it gets kind of really interesting to look at it just as a flesh and blood creature.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think about the creatures that and these were credible people, okay? That I knew them. They weren't prone to making up stories.
Right.
Yet they would see the most amazing things. Like in Arizona, near where I lived, there was a reservoir, and there was numerous sightings in the reservoir of a white feathered serpent.
Yeah.
Now, some of the Native American legends involved, I don't remember if it was men or women, one or the other wasn't supposed to swim in those waters or bathe in those waters.
Right.
Because of this creature. And I know this was an Anglo child, but there was a kid that almost drowned. And he was rescued. There were frequent drownings out there. I mean,
right.
It's nothing unusual to have one or two
right.
a year. But he was rescued, and he was a child that wasn't prone to, making fanciful tales.
Right.
And he insisted I'm thinking it was a lady. There was a lady under the water that tried to keep him there. All right, now, granted, he'd had oxygen deprivation and
right.
a number of circumstances that would have, made you prone to seeing things, you might say.
Yeah, being a hypnagogic, yeah. Right.
But he was very, very insistent. It was very real to him.
Yeah, and in the Skinwalker case, they have a reservoir up there, and it's man-made, and it was created in, I think, the 60s. And they've had lots and lots of reports of lake snake-looking monster that's been there, So, I mean, a lot of times these lake monsters, there's another, is it Champ? No, it wasn't Champ. There's another lake monster that's famous up in Scotland area. It was actually it's in Ireland, and there's no possible way that the river, the loch there, could sustain any kind of activity that would create these multiple sightings. So we got to ask ourselves, if these people are credible witnesses, which in almost all cases they are. I mean, you've got cop reports, you've got two priests and another one. If these are credible reports, then what is it that's out there? If the ecosystem can't sustain this large, whatever it is, plesiosaur, gigantic eel, whatever you want to say, then how are these people seeing this thing over and over again? And the Loch Ness Monster is a perfect example of that because there's so much strangeness attached to them. I mean, there's also a lot of paranormal activity that surrounds the Loch Ness Monster because from the first recorded sightings was done, I think, by St. Jerome when he came to Scotland, and he was walking around, and near the beach there was the natives, yelling that this beast has this guy and he's drowning, and St. Jerome sent out one of his guys to show him that that's just bull, and his guy supposedly got snatched up and drowned. So St. Jerome said a prayer and chased the demon away. So I mean, from the very first stories of the Loch Ness Monster, you see this element of supernatural activity that's attached, but that gets ignored a lot of times.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that paranormal events always involve a camel-headed humanoid or a Bigfoot or a giant serpent with feathers or
right.
whatever. But, sometimes the sightings you have are pretty mundane. In my own case, I had been out in the forest in Arizona, and I was on my way home, and I was traveling with my mother and my son. My son was about 8, I guess, at the time. And we were all in the pickup, and as we would come out, we would pass by an old work camp that had been largely shut down. At one time, they had their own school, they had a store, and everything. Most of that stuff had already been torn down. There was, I think a couple of trailer houses and a row of motel-like housing for fire workers. And that was all that was left at this site. And like I said, once upon a time, it had been really a town in itself. And as we're coming out, I look up and I see a brand new, shiny water tower. You know, typical big tank on stilt-like legs, you know, over the trees. And, you know, I remember pointing out to my mother and my son and saying, look, they put in a brand new water tower. We talked about it. And if for some reason I didn't look for it when we were actually in the work camp, because we were just coming up to it. Can't even see the work camp because of the thick trees. And we went on home. Well, the next day I was at work, and I actually worked with a guy who had grown up out there in that what had been a little town then. And I told him, I said, hey, you know, they put a new water tower out there. And he's like, no way, they're tearing that thing down. They're shutting it down. They're not going to reopen that place. I said, I'm telling you, I saw a new water tower. And he was just as insistent there was no way. So on my next days off, of course, we got to load up and go back out there.
Right.
Because I'm going to go take a picture of this water tower. Well, there was no water tower. Now, we all three saw it. It was daylight. Now that, you know, it has to qualify as a supernatural or paranormal event.
Yep.
Because what did we really see? I don't know. But I know that it wasn't what we thought.
Yeah, there's reports of disappearing houses that'll pop up so often in the woods and disappearing, even a child's insane asylum that I was looking for out in California. Never did locate it, so maybe it disappeared permanently. But yeah, those do occur, and it's like you said, you know, those would have to qualify as paranormal just because they fall out the scope of normal, you know, normal things that happen in daily
it's
occurrence.
like my daughter and I have been looking, like 15 years for a truck stop along
Yep.
I-40 between Amarillo and Tucumcari, New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't exist. We have concluded this.
You would be surprised how many times, and truckers are one of our best resources with, especially like ghost cafes and stuff like that. There's a lot.
Well, you know, at the time that we stopped there, it was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm traveling alone with the two kids, and I think we had a kitten in the car. And I remember thinking, this is the weirdest truck stop I've ever been in.
Right.
It had 2 really old gas pumps. And we go inside, and we had to go up a short staircase to the bathrooms, which was weird in itself. And everybody in this truck stop kind of looked alike. All right? And there wasn't much on the shelves, but everything that was on the shelves looked like it had been there for 50 years. And I was totally weirded out, because normally when I'd gone in a place like that for us to use the bathroom, I'd have picked up a drink, a snack, something. And when I stopped there, I'd intended to buy gasoline. And I was so weirded out. I would come out, and instead of pulling the car up to the gas pump, I told the kids to get in the car. We're getting the heck out of here. It was like all these people stared at us the whole time. And they didn't look right. They looked like their family tree hadn't branched, and they were all definitely off of it.
Shallow end of the DNA pool, huh?
I mean, it was really, really strange, the whole thing.
Always listen to your gut, because that's one thing I learned in the field. You always got to trust your instincts if you got them.
Well, I told them, I said, let's get the heck out of here now.
Right.
I remember that when I took the off-ramp, this truck stop was set in among some trees, and it was down lower than the interstate. Now, anybody that's traveled through this area, that in itself is a little odd, all right? There is, and it was on the north side of the interstate. There is no such place. I have made that trip numerous times. My daughter's made it numerous times. We have looked actively for this truck stop just because it was such a weird experience.
Right, no doubt. Yeah, like I said,
and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, we get a lot of stories like that from truckers. That, like I said, you got the Disappearing Cafe and Phantom Hitchhiker, but also the other popular one is that they'll, and it's usually, I think it is in Arizona, that they basically will have to get a certain amount of distance, but they don't have the time, and they take this highway that they've never seen before, and there's no cars on it or nothing, and they roll in and they cut 6 hours, 4 hours, whatever amount of time they need off their haul, they clip that off somehow. So they try to go back and find it, and of course they can't. So there's a lot of that stuff that actually truckers especially have brought to our attention as far as like disappearing places that have been there and no longer there. So
well, like the Devil's Highway, okay?
Yeah.
There was Highway 666.
Yes.
And it ran, there was two of them. There was one in Arizona and there was one in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
In New Mexico, it ran from Gallup, New Mexico to Shiprock.
Right.
They've changed the names on it.
Yes,
Okay?
they have. They sure have.
And I used to make that trek a lot because I had family in Farmington. So
Right.
I would make that drive a lot, sometimes way in the middle of the night. The same thing, there was a highway, and it actually used to close in the wintertime. They didn't plow it. But it was along the eastern edge of the state, and I'm thinking it ran from, like, Wickenburg down to Clifton, Morenci or something.
Right.
And it's in some rough country out there. And I've been down that road, too. We went on a camping trip out there, and I have to admit, it was a strange camping trip. We were out there long enough, we lost track of time, and we actually ran out of food on the trip.
Wow.
I think we were out there 3 days. That's all we intended to be out there. I don't know anymore. This was over 20 years ago now, so don't ask me to recall the details. I remember it as being a really good trip, but I'm like, what the heck did we do for 3 days, 3 or 4 days out there?
You didn't eat the mushrooms, right?
No, It was my mother, my daughter, and I, okay? I don't remember what the heck we did. And we have to have been doing something.
Yeah, that's, we get a lot of that, too. There's, what do they call it, lacunal amnesia, where you can't remember specific events. It's interesting how the mind works, how the memory works. It cuts in and out and assimilates things, and it's always been interesting to see how the mind works.
Well, a lot of people too, and there again, this is something I know very well from personal experience. They don't realize that we're hardwired. When we see something, our mind looks for a match.
Yeah, exactly.
And even when you consciously are aware that this match is wrong,
right, your brain,
your brain will keep insisting that is
what it is.
X. Now, in my case, it was I looked out the tent. I saw what appeared to be a gorilla or ape standing beside the truck.
Right.
Now, I was camping on the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. Mm-hmm. Apes are in real short supply, okay?
Yeah, I don't think there was any overturned circus carts.
No.
Which is what they always
And you really don't even hear, on the Mogollon Rim, you don't hear stories of Bigfoot either.
Right.
And, we hear lots of stories, but Bigfoot's not among them.
Yeah.
And, my daughter's a diabetic, and between her and my son, I had been up, like, I think every 30 minutes all night long.
Right.
And, why I look out, and I see this image, and finally I got my daughter woke up, and I asked her, I said, look out there and tell me what's in front of the truck. And she looks out, and she says, it's a garbage bag. Now, once she says it's a garbage bag, my mind says, oh, yeah, it's a garbage bag. I told you that all along. Now, in my mind, it had really been telling me, that's an ape.
Right.
That is a gorilla standing there. And I'm like, there's no way there's a gorilla standing there. Oh, yeah, that's a gorilla. I have these conversations with my own mind. It's probably a symptom of my dementia, but I'm like, no, that is not a gorilla. Yes, that's a gorilla. And, it really was, it kind of, disturbed me. So I did some research. And that was why. Your mind wants to match any image you see to a known image.
Absolutely.
And it will do so even if it's not a correct match.
Exactly.
So, it makes your personal observations sometimes are suspect, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, the mind is a tricky beast.
Well, it makes me wonder, how much of our paranormal observations are really only occurring within our own brain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's, a valid idea because most of the time you're talking about things that would be totally subjective. In some cases, yeah, you get some evidence, some footprints or some hair or this or that. But yeah, generally, everything that we see is going through our filter of consciousness. So we're going to attach our own significance to it.
Well, like these black thing, encounters, I guess you might say.
Uh-huh.
Are we really seeing anything, or is this something that, say there's a UFO and there's aliens hanging around and they want us to believe? Is this an image they're implanting in our brain?
Exactly. I mean, it's really impossible as hell, because just because something you're experiencing, it may not actually occupy objective reality, but the psychologists are always telling us that that reality is composed of the collectives, the collective consciousness, and then our own individual perceptions. So it's kind of it's tough to make the call sometimes, whether or not something's actually happening in reality or not, because it's scary enough and real enough to you when you're experiencing it. So.
Now, the only thing, like when referring to the black thing, often people, want to find a weapon to fight against various entities or encounters or experiences or whatever. In the black thing, I have found several stories that involve attempts to fight back.
Right.
And the idea that, to shoot it is very common in you might say the collective American consciousness.
Right.
Because, we got the shoot 'em up cowboy image always,
You are John Wayne, yes, sir.
Yes,
yes,
sir. And the general consensus was the bullets didn't have much effect on the black thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a possibility that the muzzle flash did.
That's nice.
And that in fact, that a weapon against this black thing, your best weapon may be one of those, 10 million candle watt
spotlight type.
Yes, I was trying to think of the word spotlight.
Yeah.
Which a lot of us carry them in our vehicles. They are very useful. If there's something in the woods, you can spotlight it.
Yep.
If you break down, you can spotlight that.
Yep, it's very, very handy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that is interesting. Though I hadn't heard about the muzzle flash. That's actually really interesting.
It's enough that I make sure that I have one with me when I'm going out, because I have to admit, out of all the things I've seen that have scared me a little bit, the black thing scares me a whole lot.
Well, then it's good that you stay prepared. That's a good thing.
I like the light idea.
They seem to, and this is just from my own experience, but there is some tradition, and like the ringing of the bells in Christianity has to do with routing demons out and things of this nature back in the Middle Ages. But there does seem to be a correlation between sound frequency and also these shadow entities and some of the other monster-type entities. They seem to kind of dissipate if you get to a certain tone. And that I actually found out kind of by accident. I had spotted one of these things in a cemetery, and it happened to be close to where a train was, a real train, not a ghost train. And the train was coming through, and it was blowing its whistle, and every time it would blow its whistle, this thing would just shake and kind of give the impression that it was, almost breaking apart. So we had tried some things with that, and kind of worked it into our cleansing kit, and it's actually been pretty effective. So.
Well, I know I was doing some research about the various superstitions and whatnot involved around New Year's Eve, start of the new year.
Right.
And I actually went through, quite, for me, a very elaborate ritual. I figured, okay, we could do with some new stuff. Let's get rid of the old.
All right. Put New Year's out.
Yeah. And it involves, making banging noises and opening the front door that I never used to chase out the old year.
Right.
And some things that I have to admit Greg thought were kind of going a little overboard,
Yeah, but those symbolic acts are good because they tune into, the symbolism and the brain. It's beyond the rational thought. So it ties into our more base instincts. So that's...
Well, I've always claimed, too, rituals are like crutches to help us focus our mind.
Right, absolutely. They're focal points.
Yeah, and they help that to occur by going through these little rituals, whether they're burning incense before we begin our meditation or whatever ritual, that particular person has. It's a tool that they're using to focus their mind to get to an appropriate point.
Right.
So, there's nothing wrong with rituals.
Nope, not at all. I totally agree. And it's always been interesting to me to, kind of look at the both the indigenous people but also the Asian type folk with the Eastern philosophies and kind of how they tie that together. A lot of times they have a better grasp of that type of mentality because it's much more prevalent in their societies. They interact with the spirits every day. There's ancestor reverence and this type of thing. Here in the West, we're the daytime mind. We're the logical westernized thinking. We created the justice system and a lot of these other things that are basically symbols of logic. So it's kind of interesting duality to look at how the Easterners approach things and how we approach things, and they're basically the same. It's just two different sides of the same coin. So.
Yeah. Yeah, well, having worked closely with people from many different cultures, you see that, a lot of times it's a different path to get there, but we're all going to the same spot.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I've always maintained. I don't care, anybody's religion, sexual makeup, any of that stuff. It's all you. As long as you're, walking the path and you're legitimate about it. You're not trying to make money off it or be a charlatan or this or that. I have no problem with you. That's all paths lead to God or righteousness or whatever you want to put it in there. The source, higher power, whatever it is. It's all the same to me.
Right. Yeah. And there's more similarities than there are differences, actually.
Exactly.
I think it's only within the rituals that you really see that much difference.
Yeah, I think, I forget the exact quote, but basically the quote is, religions are only different when you deal with them at retail, wholesale. When God does them, they're basically the same thing. It's just changes in the translation. So I think that to be very true.
Yeah. So, within different cultures, do you encounter different sorts of paranormal events?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Asians, since my wife is from Korea, she's like a plethora of ghost stories from Asia land, and their ghosts are mostly focused around the educational system. A lot of times the story will be like there's two competing people, and then they're number one and number two, and the number two is always number two, and the number one's always one, and eventually, the number two commits suicide or kills the number one, and it's really interesting to see where their ghosts are really concentrated, and they also like a lot of indigenous cultures have much more belief in the spirits, like earth spirits, mountain spirits, these type things. So it's really interesting to watch, and I've been lucky enough to be able to watch a few of my mother-in-law's rituals and stuff like the stepping on swords and some of that stuff. It's really fascinating stuff, and we're getting to a point in the West where we are starting to validate some of these things with science, with yoga and meditation and acupuncture and things that are starting to be covered by health practitioners, So it's just a different model and different system, but it actually has scientific validity as we're learning. It's just that it took us, however 200 years to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to admit, most people within my personal circle of friends meditate at least what I would call somewhat frequently.
Right.
A couple times a month at the minimum.
Right. Yeah. My dad
meditate every day. Yeah. And there's many different ways to meditate. Some people go through a fairly elaborate ritual.
Yeah.
Other people just go sit down and
go at it. Yeah.
They appear to be just taking a cat nap or something. They're just sitting there with their eyes closed, not saying a word.
Right.
And some people need complete seclusion for it, and other people, I swear, they could do it sitting in the middle of Grand Central Station.
Yeah, it would make a difference. Yeah, and it's interesting because all the religions do have some kind of meditation. Whether Christian contemplation or any of the others, there is a state where you're basically putting your mind to you're shutting off the mental chatter, and you're basically trying to reconnect with the source, whatever that would be.
Well, even just taking the opportunity to shut down the mental chatter is quite
an
useful.
Act. Yeah, that's an act in and of itself that's beneficial, no doubt.
Yeah, and for many of us, that event alone is, that's a 5-star event.
Yeah, no doubt.
We just have a lot of mental chatter going on. It's hard to focus your mind where you shut out, I need to do X, Y, and Z at work,
right.
and so-and-so is doing such and such to me, and I need to pay these bills, and this is broken, I need to fix that, and I need to call so-and-so, and I haven't heard from so-and-so, and so forth and so on.
Got to try to grab a little piece of serenity there where you can.
Yeah, it's probably my fondness for camping. There's nothing to me more relaxing than, because I usually go with there's usually a group of us, but sitting around a campfire, drinking our coffee, and if it wasn't for the fire, we'd probably be freezing our tushes off. But we tend to do it more often in the winter when it's cold and yucky. But the whole idea of being able to focus your mind is very, very useful. Now, another thing you mentioned in your book is things like tulpas and golems and projected thought forms.
Right,
Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of, like I said, it's kind of the category I put Nessie into just recently after doing research. It's the thought forms are basically the sum of these manifested ideas. Basically, you're talking about people that are using their thoughts to create something that can appear here in our reality to the people. And the tulpa is an example of that. It's in Hindu, it's basically a tutelatory agent. It's somebody that helps teach you. And the Westerner by the name of Neil, Madame Neil, she was doing travels over in India, and she ran into a painter friend of hers, and he had one of these tulpas that he had constructed and she seen him following around. She asked him, who's that following you around? And he kind of explained to her what a tulpa was, and she went and talked to some of the people, and they taught her how to basically construct one, although they advised her against it. She eventually did construct one. It had an appearance of like Friar Monk. Lots of people seen it, people that were on the trains, people that would travel with her, all these people seen it interacting. Eventually, it kind of ran amok, which all these thought forms do, and it took her several months to actually to get rid of it and kind of just disavow it from her service. And it's just interesting phenomena, like we talked about the shadow, possible thought projection, and then you couple this with like I said, the Nessie shapeshifter theory and some of these other things, and even the Curse of the Joker and kind of the role that played. And it's interesting to see how thoughts can kind of take on a life of their own.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the golems.
Oh yeah, golems. Golems are basically beings that are created out of holy mud, as if there's any other kind. They're created. It's from the Jewish Kabbalist tradition, and basically you take mud, and the holy man will write a magic word, E-M-E-T, on the golem's forehead, or we'll write it on a piece of paper and put it into the golem's mouth, and then the golem is tied to that rabbi, and will do his bidding. And that's something that's been reported even as late as World War II. There was supposedly a Nazi that snuck up into the attic where one of these golems was at and was killed, which is obviously got to be hearsay, because if he was killed, we wouldn't know about it. So it's another one of those that just ties in with the idea that you can create something that actually has a physical existence of its own. And we've seen that kind of with the Joker, the Curse of the Joker joint. Whenever Dark Knight was being filmed, it was filmed in Chicago, and this is where we had the Return of Phantom Clowns. The Joker curse, kind of went from Ledger to Bale, who was arrested, on the London premiere night. Morgan Freeman got in a car wreck that actually needed the jaws of life to cut him out. There was another one of the crew members died on doing a stunt take, and it just seemed to kind of grow from that, and has been affecting different people throughout the country since then.
Mm-hmm. Well, the story of golem-like creatures, they exist. They're usually created by holy men of some sort.
Right.
Usually do the holy men's bidding. I mean, even the skinwalker, they're people who have become these things, but they're doing the bidding of someone else.
Right.
And these creatures usually are associated with evil. Is that true with the golem?
Not as much with the golem. The golem's kind of perceived as kind of being a slow-witted type god-type creature. Basically, it's something that God allowed the rabbis, that were holy, to create. But it's more every time the golem really attacks, it's usually somebody that's trying to hurt the Jews or kill the Jews or whatever. But a lot of times what will happen is the rabbi will kind of lose power over the golem, and the golem will start killing people that he's not been, told to kill. So sometimes you see that whole idea of the golem or the thought projection developing its own consciousness and start acting out against its creator or against the creator's will.
The double-edged sword. But guess what? We have run out of time.
Alrighty.
All right. Well, Sean, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic and informative guest.
Thank you very much.
I've enjoyed this program. I've enjoyed this program with you tonight very much. I hope all of the audience has as well, and that they have found that it provided plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Join us again next week for a special anniversary program with some fascinating guests on the Dawn of Shades. Sure to be another fascinating conversation. With that, we are out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.